The first thing I remember is the sound of the crowd, a roar that felt less like voices and more like fire devouring dry timber. It was late afternoon, the kind of day where the sun hangs heavy over the town, scorching the dust into glass. I rode in slow, my horse nervous beneath me, and what I saw in the center square was something I will never forget. 3 young women, dragged by their hair into the dirt, tied up like cattle. The whole town circled them, spitting, jeering, kicking until blood streaked the road. They were not prisoners. They were not criminals. No, these women were trophies, ornaments of the town's rage. I knew their faces before anyone told me their names. Daughters of Sheriff Miles, a man I once called Commander, a man who once pulled me from certain death during the war. But the town didn't remember him as a savior anymore. They remembered only the gallows in front of the courthouse, the traitor's rope snapping his neck while children laughed. That laughter still echoes in my ears. They said his blood was cursed. And so, his daughters became the proof of that curse. I watched them suffer, bound in a wooden pen like animals, left under the burning sky without food or water. The townsfolk poured buckets onto the ground just out of their reach, laughed as the girls tried to lick moisture from the mud. When night came, stones kept them from sleeping. Old men nodded, children pointed, women smirked. And the girls, Rebecca, Hannah, and Eloise, shook beneath it all. I saw no guilt in their eyes, only pain. Their crime was not action. Their crime was birth. That was the moment I understood something dangerous. If I left them there, I would be no different from the mob. And if I chose to save them, my name, my land, and maybe even my life would be forfeit. But when their hollow eyes met mine across the pen, I knew the decision had already been made. I left the square that night, but my mind never did. The screams followed me across the prairie, chasing me into my sleep, pulling me back to the faces of those 3 broken daughters. By dawn, I couldn't stay away. My horse carried me back to the edge of town where the wooden pen stood like a scar in the dust. The girls were still there, filthy, bleeding, half-conscious. Rebecca, the eldest, tried to shield the younger 2, though her own body trembled with weakness. I could see her lips move, whispering words only the wind could hear. It was not a plea for life, but a farewell. The people passed by the pen as if it were a show. Some spat, others laughed. No one offered water. I sat on my horse, unseen among the shadows, and remembered the day Sheriff Miles dragged me off the battlefield, blood pouring from my chest. He had said only one thing: live long enough to make it count. Those words returned to me now, cutting through the haze of fear. If I rode away again, I would be nothing but another coward feeding the mob's hunger. But if I climbed down, if I dared touch the cursed blood of the traitor's children, the whole town would turn its fire on me. My ranch, my livelihood, every ounce of sweat I had poured into the land, it would all burn. Still, I knew what had to be done. I dismounted, tied my horse in the shadows, and walked toward the pen. The closer I came, the louder the whispers grew in my mind. This is the choice that will cost you everything. But some debts are too great to ignore. Sheriff Miles had saved my life once. Tonight, it was my turn. The smell hit me before I even saw them properly. Dust, blood, sweat, and fear all tangled together. The 3 girls huddled in the corner of the pen, their skin raw from rope burns, their dresses torn and caked with mud. Rebecca's eyes met mine, wide and wary, as if seeing me meant she had been mistaken all along about the world. I knelt slowly, letting her measure my intentions. There was no pride in me, only a simple, dangerous truth. I would not leave them here. I had brought a small canteen of water, poured it slowly into Rebecca's hands. She drank with trembling desperation, the kind of thirst that isn't just from heat, but from the emptiness the town had left inside her. Hannah and Eloise stared from behind her, faces pale, hair plastered to their cheeks, and I knew I had to act fast. The night would be our cover, but I also knew the town would sense anything unusual. Their hatred was sharp, like the edge of a knife that never dulls. I pried the wooden slats open, my hands steady despite the rage that hummed beneath the surface. The girls stumbled out, too weak to stand on their own. I lifted them one by one, their bodies light as if the cruelty had hollowed them completely. Outside the pen, the world felt alien, silent, empty, but I couldn't trust it. Every shadow could be the glint of a knife, every sound a warning that the mob had remembered them. As I carried them toward the stable behind my ranch, I realized the truth. This was no longer just about saving 3 lives. It was about standing against the entire town, defying their hatred, and proving that even in the darkest corners of the West, mercy could exist. I had chosen my path, and there was no turning back. The moon hung low over the ranch, pale and indifferent, as I laid the girls down in the shadowed barn. Their breathing was shallow, eyes half closed, but the tiniest flicker of relief crossed Rebecca's face when I poured the last of my water into her trembling hands. I knew we couldn't linger. The town would discover their absence by sunrise, and then the real danger would begin. Every board in the barn seemed to creak like a warning. Every whisper of wind through the open doors carried the memory of the mob's jeers. I checked their injuries as best I could. Bruises mottled their skin, rope burns scarred their wrists, and exhaustion had left them fragile as autumn leaves. I whispered a promise I wasn't sure they could hear. "You'll live. I'll make sure of it." Their hollow eyes barely acknowledged me, but that was enough. Even in the shadow of their suffering, they had not lost the spark that made them human. By dawn, I had packed what little supplies I could spare. Horses were saddled, the wagon hidden under a tarp, and every ounce of planning focused on one thing: getting them out of the town alive. I glanced back at the place where Sheriff Miles had fallen, the courthouse looming like a monument to the injustice we were fleeing. My heart clenched. The land, my ranch, my name, everything was at stake. Yet the thought of leaving them to the mob was unthinkable. I carried them to the wagon, one by one, their bodies limp against mine. The first rays of sun crept across the prairie, and I could already hear the distant sound of boots on dry earth. The chase would come, and when it did, there would be no mercy. But I had made my choice. No town, no mob, no hatred could undo what needed to be done. Tonight we ran, not just from the town, but toward a chance at life, toward a promise that the blood of the innocent could mean more than vengeance. The wagon rattled across the dry prairie, dust curling in clouds behind us, and every mile felt like a lifetime. The girls clung to each other, silent, their bodies trembling not just from exhaustion, but from the terror that had been burned into them by the town. I could feel their fear like a weight pressing against my own chest. Every glance over my shoulder reminded me of the danger. Men on horseback, hatred in their eyes, determined to make the daughters of Sheriff Miles pay for a crime they didn't commit. I drove the wagon toward a narrow canyon I remembered from years back, a place where the hills rose high and the trees were dense enough to hide a small army. The sun rose, relentless and hot, burning through the thin fabric of our cover. I could see vultures circling in the distance, drawn not by curiosity, but by the scent of weakness and death. The girls' skin was streaked with blood and dust, their hair tangled, their hands raw from the ropes that had held them captive. At one point, Eloise let out a soft, broken sob, and I realized the full weight of what they had endured. No one had come for them before. No one had stopped the mob. Their lives had been nothing but punishment since their father's death. And yet, here they were, clinging to a chance I had given them. That chance might cost me everything. My ranch, my reputation, maybe even my life. But I couldn't turn back. I wouldn't. By midday, the first riders appeared on a distant ridge. 5 men, weapons glinting, scanning the prairie like predators. I adjusted my grip on the reins, eyes narrowing. The chase had begun, and there would be no room for mistakes. Every turn of the wagon, every careful step of the horses, mattered. We were alive, yes, but the town's hatred was relentless, and it would take everything I had to keep them that way. The wind carried the sound of hooves before I saw them, the rhythm of pursuit beating in my chest as surely as the girl's ragged breathing. My hands gripped the reins so tightly my knuckles burned, every muscle in my body alert, every instinct screaming that one misstep would end everything. The wagon creaked over rocks and dry riverbeds, horses straining under the weight of 3 fragile lives. I cast a glance back. 5 men, relentless, eyes locked on us, hatred written in every line of their faces. They wanted the daughters of Sheriff Miles as trophies, and I would not give them that satisfaction. The girls were quiet now, fear pressing them into silence, but I could feel it vibrating between us. Rebecca's small hand brushed against mine as if asking the unspoken question, "Will you get us out alive?" I didn't answer. My life had become nothing more than the road ahead, the next ridge, the next hollow where we could disappear from the eyes of the town. I whispered a promise instead, soft enough that only the canyon could hear. "You'll survive. I swear it." We reached a sharp bend in the canyon, and I made a decision that could cost us all. The wagon was too slow for what came next. I pulled the girls from it, one by one, their bodies weak as if all the cruelty of the town had hollowed them entirely. They clung to my shoulders and back as I mounted them onto the horses. The sound of the wagon rattling free behind us masked our movement for a precious moment, giving us a chance to gain ground. Through trees and scrub, we rode as fast as the frightened horses could carry us, bullets cracking through the air, kicking up dust and splintering wood around us. I fired over my shoulder, not to kill, only to buy time. Every shot was a heartbeat, every heartbeat a gamble. And still, the girls held on, eyes wide, bodies pressed close, trusting me with their lives in a world that had shown them none. By the time the sun sank low behind the canyon walls, we had put distance between ourselves and the town, but the relief was fragile. The girls collapsed beside a small creek, their limbs trembling, their skin streaked with dirt and blood. I knelt beside them, trying to clean the worst of the grime, pouring water over their hands and faces, feeling the tension in their bodies ease ever so slightly. For a moment they looked human again, not trophies of hate, not broken shadows, but young women on the edge of survival. Eloise, the youngest, had a swelling on her ankle from the ride, and I wrapped it with what little cloth I carried. Every movement reminded me of how fragile life had become for them, how much they had endured at the hands of people who had once called themselves civilized. They whispered no words of thanks, only quiet shivers, and I knew it wasn't fear of me. They had learned to trust no one. Yet they stayed, pressed close to my side, clinging to the small flicker of hope I had carried them toward. As night fell, the canyon became a sanctuary of shadows. Coyotes called in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of pine and dry earth. I built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke low, just enough to warm them without revealing our position. Sitting beside the fire, I thought of Sheriff Miles and the world that had allowed such cruelty. My hands were raw, my back sore, but my resolve was stronger than ever. I had chosen this path, and the only way forward was through the darkness. In the quiet, I realized that survival was more than escaping the town. It was about teaching the girls that they were more than what hatred had made them. That night, beneath the stars, they began to see the first hints of life beyond punishment, a life I would protect, even if it cost me everything. Morning light crept through the canyon, painting the rocky walls in gold and shadow, but there was no comfort in the beauty. The town had already begun its hunt. Dust clouds rose on the horizon, the sound of hooves carrying the same hatred that had haunted the girls since their father's death. I mounted my horse, my rifle slung across my back, and helped the girls into position. Every movement had to be precise. One misstep, one miscalculation, and all of our lives would end before the sun reached its zenith. Rebecca, now a little steadier, gripped the reins tightly. Eloise's ankle had stiffened, but I forced her to mount, knowing that hesitation could cost us everything. Hannah stayed close, her body pressed against the horse, trembling from fatigue and fear, yet refusing to speak, because words, she had learned, could betray you in this world. I whispered small instructions, guiding them through narrow passages, across rocky ridges, and through shallow streams, using every trick I knew from years riding the open land. The riders closed in faster than I expected, and I realized the town would not relent. Their justice had become obsession, and we were the proof of their rage. Bullets kicked up dust around us, snapping close, reminding me that mercy was a luxury we could not afford. Every leap of the horses, every sharp turn, carried a danger so immediate that my stomach churned with adrenaline and fear. Yet through it all, the girls held on. I felt their trust, fragile but real, pressing me to fight harder, think faster, and refuse to let the hatred of others dictate their fate. By midday, we found a hidden grove, a small pocket of safety behind a curtain of trees. The girls collapsed again, and I realized we could only rest for a short while before the town found our trail. But in that brief moment, I saw something in their eyes. Strength, resilience, a spark of hope that had survived unimaginable cruelty. And I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. The grove offered a brief reprieve, but I knew it wouldn't last. The sound of distant hooves, carried faintly on the wind, reminded me that the town's hunters were relentless. My heart pounded not only for the girls' safety, but for the impossible choice we had made together, running against an entire town whose hatred had been festering for years. I checked their injuries, cleaning the worst of the blood and mud, though my hands shook with exhaustion. Rebecca's eyes, once hollow and wary, now held a quiet determination. She had begun to understand that survival demanded more than fear. It demanded courage. Eloise rested her head against my shoulder, trusting me completely, though her ankle throbbed painfully with every shift. Hannah stayed silent, her body taut, eyes scanning every shadow, aware that even a moment of carelessness could cost us everything. I realized then that the girls were not just following me. They were learning to stand, even if only slightly, on their own. And I could not afford to falter. By midday, the town's riders closed the distance. 5 men, the sheriff among them, eyes hard, fingers tight on triggers, riding for the daughters of a man they still called a traitor. I knew confrontation was inevitable. There was no escape that wouldn't leave them exposed. We would have to fight, not just for life, but for the truth that the girls were not cursed, not trophies, but human beings with a right to survive. I steadied my rifle, whispered one final reassurance, and prepared to meet the rage head-on. This was more than survival. It was a reckoning. The riders emerged from the ridge like shadows of the past, their faces hard with hate, their guns raised and ready. I felt the weight of the girls' trust pressing against my chest, and for a moment I considered what it would mean to turn away, what it would mean to let the town take them, to let their lives be defined by cruelty. But the memory of Sheriff Miles saving me on the battlefield came rushing back, fierce and unyielding. I would not betray that debt. Not now, not ever. We rode into the open, dust swirling, bullets snapping around us. The girls clung to me, their small bodies braced against the horses as I fired over my shoulder, not to kill, but to create the space we needed. The canyon walls echoed with gunfire, the sound bouncing off rocks and trees as if the land itself were warning the town to stop. But they didn't. Their anger was relentless, a tidal wave built on years of lies and fear. I guided the horses through a narrow ravine, where the rocky walls shielded us, forcing the riders to scatter and slow their advance. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat was a chance, every breath a gamble. Rebecca and Hannah held on, silent but steady, while Eloise whimpered softly, trusting me to lead them through the chaos. I realized then that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. As the last of the riders disappeared beyond the ridge, I brought the horses to a stop in a hidden alcove, the girls' chests heaving as they caught their breath. They looked at me, fragile yet unbroken, and I knew the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time since the town had branded them cursed, I saw hope. We had survived the hunt, and with survival came a chance to rebuild, to reclaim what hatred had tried to steal. The canyon grew quiet as night settled, and for the first time in days, the girls slept without trembling, without the shadow of the town's hatred pressing on them. I watched over them, my rifle resting beside me, the fire crackling low. The chase had ended, but what remained was harder, the slow work of reclaiming lives that had been nearly destroyed. I looked at Rebecca, her eyes still haunted but sharper, filled with a strength I had not seen before. She had survived the worst and begun to understand that she, like her sisters, was not cursed. Eloise stirred, touching the earth as if checking to see if it would reject her. Hannah sat beside her, staring at the stars, a small smile tugging at her lips. They were learning to trust the world again, not because it had suddenly become kind, but because someone had refused to abandon them. I realized then that true courage wasn't in facing the mob, or even in riding through a hail of bullets. It was in staying, in protecting what others deemed worthless, and in believing in the spark of humanity when the world refused to see it. We found a hidden valley beyond the canyon, a place untouched by the town's cruelty. There, we built small shelters from wood and stone, planted seeds, and let the girls take part in shaping a life that was theirs, not defined by hatred. Each day, they grew stronger, their laughter returning, quiet at first, then full of life. I saw it in the way Rebecca tended the soil, in the careful steps Eloise took across the stream, and in Hannah's steady gaze, no longer haunted but determined. I knew the town would not forget, and that one day they might come looking again. But for now, this valley was ours. The girls were no longer trophies of hate. They were survivors, builders of their own destiny. And as the sun set over the hills, casting golden light across the valley, I felt something I had not in years. Hope, real and tangible. Sometimes the hardest trails lead to the most unforgettable rewards.